Fantastic to see such a big audience in the flesh for this wonderful lecture, and a very warm welcome. I'm delighted to welcome you all here and those watching on the live stream to what's the 9th Stop MS Appeal Annual Lecture. And as you can see, it's entitled Myelin Repair, From Lab Discoveries to Clinical Impact. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Nick Mobley and I'm the CEO at the MS Society. Now, I know this isn't the first annual lecture for many of you, but for those of you joining us for the first time, welcome and thank you so much for supporting the MS Society. We're the largest charity funder of MS research in the UK, and we play a world-leading role in improving the quality of life for people with MS. We hold this lecture every year to share the latest updates for everyone in the MS community, and we're really delighted that you could all be here with us tonight. Now, across the UK, over 150,000 people have multiple sclerosis. It's unpredictable and different for everyone. It's often painful and exhausting and can cause problems with how people walk, move, see, think and feel. We know what people with MS want, and that is no relapses, no accumulation of disability and no uncertainty. They want us to find treatments that slow or stop progression for everyone. Now, hopefully, you will all be aware of our £100 million Stop MS Appeal, funding our research programme. With 18 months left to go, we still have £15 million of that total left to raise. Now, if you are not already giving and are able to do so, we would be so grateful if you would use the QR code, which is located at the back of the bios, which you'll have found on your chair. Or for those of you joining us online, the link to our donation page can be found in the description box. The MS Society is very proud to be working with leading scientists, and tonight's speaker, Professor Thóra Káradóttir, is no exception. She is co-lead of our MS Society Cambridge Centre for Myelin Repair. The lecture will be followed by a panel discussion with our Stop MS Appeal scientific ambassadors. So, Thóra, thank you again for coming to speak to us all this evening. It's much appreciated. Now, during Thóra's lecture, if you have any questions that you would like to ask, please submit them online on Slido. And after the lecture, our panel of researchers will be able to answer a few of those questions. So you just have to visit slido.com and submit a question using the event code #MSLecture24. And you can see the details up there on the slide behind me. So, to kick things off, we're now going to hear from Louise Cabral, who is from London and lives with relapsing remitting MS. Louise was diagnosed over 25 years ago, and earlier this year she took part in our collaboration with the Royal Ballet and Opera at the Royal Opera House, which I must say was absolutely amazing and hugely moving as a piece of work. Louise has her own passion for research and the links between dance and MS, and we're honoured to have her here today to share some of her personal experience. So Louise, very warm welcome.
Thank you, Nick, and good evening, everybody. Yes, the opportunity to dance at the Royal Opera House was a dream come true for me. I have danced all my life. Yes, I can't dance as I used to 30 years ago, but I've mourned my loss. And just to be sharing the stage with other dancers from the Royal Ballet was just extraordinary. Classical ballet training has been part of my life since as long as I can remember. And I am convinced that it has, over the years, helped me maintain a degree of mobility and balance and stability that was beyond what was expected of me at diagnosis and afterwards as well. Now, this is purely anecdotal, but I do believe it has wider application. And I wanted to pursue that. I completed a master's in dance science and medicine, and I'm now pursuing a PhD looking at dance or classical ballet inspired training to help people with MS. And the opportunity to take part in the Royal Opera House MS Society workshop was just fantastic because it gave me the chance to see that in action. I'm very impressed with the work that the MS Society is doing with research at the Glasgow Caledonian University, looking at this too. For someone with MS, it is empowering to feel that you can have a role to play in the management of your symptoms and your disease in general. When you are dealing with a disease which is constantly changing, which is unpredictable, that is enormously empowering. And it means we feel that we have a part to play along with the scientists in dealing with this illness. I was also, talking about being blessed, I was very blessed in the timing of my diagnosis back in 1998 because the very first drugs for treating relapsing, remitting MS were becoming available. So I was given Avonex, beta interferon, and really my MS life journey has mirrored this wonderful progression in science and medicine for treating relapsing, remitting MS. So from then, I needed to change, and I went on to Copaxone, and then on to what I call the wonder drug, Tysabri, because when I was taking it, I had that elusive, magical quality called energy, amazing, and reduced fatigue. Unfortunately, I then tested positive for the JC virus, and because my family were not too keen on the possibility of me developing progressive multifocal encephalopathy, it was decided that I should change. So I went on to what I'm still taking now, Aubagio, which was one of the first oral therapies. Now, I watched with absolute fascination and interest the work that is being done in science and medicine and the development of treatments and drugs we could but dream of just a few years ago. And myelin repair and remyelination is one of those things which has had a long-lasting fascination for me. So I'm really looking forward to the lecture this evening. Thank you.
Louise, thank you so much for so generously sharing your story with us and helping us to understand your journey with MS. We really do appreciate it. Thank you so much. I'm now delighted to welcome our speaker of for the evening, Professor Thóra Káradóttir. Thóra, please do come on up.
Good evening. It is wonderful to be here tonight and actually have made it, as I will come to this point in a minute. So I'm very honored that I received the invitation from Hattie to give the annual lecture for the MS Society. And my lecture tonight will be focusing on a myelin repair and how we can take discoveries from the lab into the clinic. So I will start my talk by introducing you to Cambridge Centre for Myelin Repair, which I recently taken over, because that is the focus of that centre, exactly to take discoveries from the lab into the clinic. And then I give you some insights in our science discoveries or findings, and then how we're taking those findings forward, and then hopefully give some future implications that I think we take for the next steps. So what is the Cambridge Centre for Myelin Repair? But first of all, when we've refocused this in our last reiteration, was to have it as a collaborative centre that has the common aim to create a world where no one suffers from a disability due to MS. That you can get a diagnosis, but it can be maintained and treated, so it will not have catastrophes for your life quality. Now, what is focus on MS? I think the audience will know this much better than me, so I will go quite quickly over this. We have this early in the, sorry, I'm not very used to the pointers. So early in the stage of the disease, you have a relapse, you lose ability, but then it comes, you gain, it restores itself, the brain heals, and it gets better. But then you can accumulate, and you can get more of these attacks. It's an autoimmune disease, so the symptom, the immune system attacks the brain, but it heals, and you get this round of losing ability, but then gaining again, until at some point that you start to accumulate disability. And what we start to think is that where it's that this effective myelin repair is what is important early in stages. And the reason for going into cumulative progression or cumulative of disability is because myelin repair has failed. So I want to take us a little bit back. We've heard just briefly earlier. Before 1993, there were no treatments for MS. This first iteration of the Cambridge Centre for Myelin Repair was established in 2005. At that time, interferon beta was the only treatment available. There were a group of PIs within the centre, I can say this because I wasn't present of the centre at that time point, who were very courageous, who decided that you needed to treat MS early. And that's a new notion. And they put forward a new treatment to attract the immune system, to actually delete it and reset it. Quite aggressive treatment, but it showed that you can reduce the number of relapses. It can be controlled. Now we have plethora of different treatments that do exactly that. I'm not going to give any comments on which one is better or not. But now, what we've now focused and since when the centre has been is to focus on myelin repair. And now when I took over in CCMR4, we are set out for new trials to try to promote myelin repair or remyelination. Now, why do we want to be doing that? We think that by combating progression in MS, the best strategy is to understand the process of myelin repair or remyelination and trying to find ways that we can target it, to promote it, and in that way we can combat progressive disability in MS. In order to do so, we understand the myelin repair, but it has to be in a concert with understanding inflammation and neuronal health, as I hope I will be able to explain shortly. The team in a centre is essential. It is not just one person, it's a group of 8 different labs, the heads of the labs are put up here, and we have a strategic committee where I and Alistair Coles lead. And then we set up collaborations with a number of laboratories in Cambridge and in companies, and we hired a group of 4 young scientists to really set out our aims for the centre and clinicians. So the centre really creates on 3 pillars. First pillar is focused on finding ways to combat MS by identifying treatments and taking them to clinical trials. The second pillar is to engage with the community, to make and create a community where everybody, with all stakeholders, clinicians, nurses, scientists, people who are affected by the condition, and the public. And then the third, and not the least important, but equally important, is to train the next generation. We set up a PhD program for MS biology, and we set up a training program for early career researchers, because by training the next generation, we ensure not only that we have excellent people in the future, and that the future will be bright, let's say, hopefully, but also we share the information within the UK and in the world by the individuals when they leave Cambridge and go and to work elsewhere. So what we've come together, clinicians and basic scientists or fundamental scientists, is to find discovery. Aim of the centre is to find mechanisms that promote myelin repair and then take them forward as new treatments for myelin repair in clinical trials. Now, my focus is, and my task, let's say, is to be at the discovery side. Now, I've been asked by the MS Society to give a motivation. Why on earth would anybody think that this would be a good thing to do or do a career out of? So I have to admit, like most neuroscientists or something, you are born with an interest. There's nothing that you can do about it. It's somewhere in your genes or epigenetics. I had interest in the brain. It was fascinating. So I was young and I got a job in a hospital. I'm from Iceland, Reykjavik. And this is a hospice where it takes care of people who need 24-hour care. And I worked at the top floor. And at the top floor, there were mainly people with MS and spinal cord injury. This is 1992. At that time, there were no treatments for MS. All right, I have to admit, I was 17. Now you can calculate how old I am. So you have two things when you're on a night shift. You can do your homework. I forgot, it's 1992. There is no internet, no social media, there's nothing like it. It doesn't exist. And in Iceland, no nighttime TV either. So there is nothing. You have to either do homework or read the neurology books in the office. And that is, of course, far more interesting. So I did that, and what I found is that there's a whole floor in Iceland with people who have problem with myelin. What is myelin? I go to the National Library in Iceland, take the biggest book I could find about neuroscience. In that book, there was one paragraph about myelin and one sentence about myelin in the central nervous system. Yet, a whole floor in Iceland, small country, has people being affected by a dysfunctional myelin. So there's a huge knowledge gap, and I want to be a part of filling into that gap. So hence, consequence, I'm standing here today. So what we do now know is that our brain, the human brain, is equally divided into so-called gray matter. That's the computational part of the brain, the computing part. And then there's the other part, is the white matter, where information is transmitted between different brain regions. Now, the gray matter is where the neuronal cell bodies lie. And then in the white matter is where they send their signals between each other through an axon, or we can call it a cable. And I tried to find an analogy or metaphor, and I came up with this because I think it's good. But I have to say, I was on the train. It took me about 3 hours to get here from Cambridge because of signaling failure. I think that's exactly what is happening here. When you do not have myelin on these axons, there are signaling failures. But we'll come to that. They started on if we can imagine that the red neuron would be, say, London, and London wants to communicate to another city, let's say New York. And that happened, in fact, in real life. That was a wish during setting up the new transatlantic telecommunication cables. They were set up in 1854, first time, put down. And the connection was so unreliable, so interrupted, so difficult. It's kind of like, Zoomed calls during the pandemic with a bad internet. It was so bad they thought this is a bad idea. Should not do this. It's not solving any problems. A few years later, they figured out they could have a multi-layered installation that, in fact, solved the problem. It became fast and reliable. Little did they know that evolution had solved that problem multiple thousands, tens of thousands of years prior by myelin, which is a multi-layered membrane around cables, axons of the nervous system. And that increases the speed of propagation so the signaling between the red neuron and the yellow neuron going from taking 300 milliseconds to only take about 5 milliseconds. Same speed as between a tortoise and a cheetah. So it's speed, but it's also reliability of the signal. And how is it made? It's made by the cells called oligodendrocytes, or oligo is small, dendro is branches, and cyte is a cell. And it wraps multi-layered, like the cables for the transatlantic cable, in order to have good signals, fast and reliable. And this makes it possible for us to be able to see, hear, move, and think. And hopefully for you to listen to this talk. Now, when the importance for myelin and oligodendrocytes becomes very clear in conditions where the oligodendrocytes or the myelin is damaged, as the signals between the neurons, between the different areas, fail, like between London and Cambridge today with the trains. And things go slow and unreliable. But this happens in multiple conditions, but is best known in the condition of MS, because we know it's one of the primary cause of our symptoms. But we also know the good news. The good news for the brain is that myelin can be repaired. And once it's repaired, function is restored. It's remarkable. We wouldn't have any problem, we wouldn't be talking here today, of course, if it was fail-safe. But it is quite remarkable that this can happen. So we have here an evidence, if you do not believe me, that there is in a brain section from a person who had MS, and it had been stained with a dye that's taken up by membrane, and myelin has a lot of membrane, so that's very dark blue. Myelin is dark blue, and the neurons are light blue. Here we have an evidence of a lesion where the immune system have attacked the myelin, and you get oligodendrocyte death and demyelination or loss of myelin. Now, there are two options. One is that the stem cells in our brain can respond to this and repair the damage. Now, we can see the evidence of repair because for some reason that we're not fully clear on, the remyelinated or the repaired myelin is always a bit thinner, takes up a little bit less dye, but that allows us to identify it in brain samples. The other option is that for some not fully cleared multiple theories of why, but for some reason, sometimes it fails. And this lack of repair, as evidence here, leaves the neurons vulnerable, and they leads to sustained disability. And in some cases, evidence is mounting that it can also lead to something called smoldering neuroinflammation, or low-grade neuroinflammation in the brain. That is not the same as when the immune system attacks the brain. And that is the underlying driver for progression. Now, myelin repair is made, as I said, by these stem cells that during development differentiate and make myelin normally. But they remain in our brain throughout our lives. And if myelin is damaged in disease, they respond and repair it. But it's a very complicated and multi-cellular process. So focusing only on one cell would give you the wrong implications. So we have neurons that have to coordinate their own damage, and myelin gets damaged, and that's the demyelinated area here. Then we have the stem cells that can respond to it and repair the myelin. But then we also have the innate immune cells that are in our brain called microglia, and they can respond to the damage and get activated, and that's often what we call neuroinflammation. Now, to make it a little bit more fun or interesting, we can think about the neuron as a control unit where all the computation of what to do is happening. The stem cells are the repair guys, or the guys you call for the repair. And the microglia are the police fire service. So when we go into a lesion that happens most of the time in the white matter, fully myelinated white matter tract, we have here oligodendrocytes, myelinated axons, stem cells, and microglia. We have an event that causes damage to the oligodendrocytes and the myelin. The microglia, or the immune cells, respond to this just like a police force would do. First one place, clear the damage, clear all the debris, and then they call on the repair guys, the stem cells, to come in and repair the area. And that's what they do. Then they repair, and everything is back almost to normal. So how is this regulated? Now, in order to understand myelin repair, we need to have good models. And I believe that it's important to have a model in an animal, that way we can study how this happens in real. And we can induce a demyelinated lesion in an animal that repairs very well. So a model of repair, because that's the focus we want. It's not a model of MS, but a model of myelin repair. And what we see that in the animal, the repair process, which is very efficient, looks very similar to a repaired lesion in the human. Now, this allows us to study repair, but what we would want to know is why does myelin repair fail? And we just made a model that we can make that very good model that remyelinates really well to fail. So we can now study this for the first time. And I also want to find this implicate. And now for the rest of the talk, on the right-hand side, I will have the implications as I think the data means for the human brain. And on the left, you will have the data. So you can choose which side you want to be looking at. So we normally have a focus on the lesion, and only on the lesion, well, because that's where the damage is. But we have this opportunity to understand how the whole brain responds. So we want to look beyond the lesion and up to the gray matter, where the neuronal cell bodies are that belong to the cables that have lost myelin. So when we look at inflammation in the gray matter, without doing and inflammation here would be red. So more red, more inflammation. So when you do a lesion, you get an inflammation far away in the gray matter where the neuronal cell bodies are. It's indicated here with increased red, and here is the increased data. However, what we find that not only after myelin regeneration has happened in the white matter, we have the neuroinflammation going down again. And our recent data indicate, in fact, that although we would have thought first that inflammation in the gray matter would be very bad and we should stop it, it's actually good and actually part of the regenerative process. So it would not be a good idea to stop it. And we say that once remyelination is, that this inflammation therefore is important to regulate the remyelination or the repair in the white matter. And once the white matter is repaired, what we have is that we have the neuroinflammation gone down, but we also have the signaling between the neurons that we lost a bit during the demyelination come back to normal. So functional recovery when we have repaired the white matter. So what would be the consequences if the white matter fails? So now we can do that, and we've stopped myelin repair in the white matter, as depicted here. And what is happening when we fail white matter lesion is failing to repair, the inflammation in the gray matter is high. And what we are seeing, it's quite high and stays high for a long time. And we feel that this is somewhat reflecting what you call smoldering inflammation, that the failure of the white matter repair or the least repair of myelin can be a lead to smoldering inflammation in the gray matter. But why does it normally, we did this experimentally, why does myelin normally fail? Because we think it's the failure that is a driver of progression. Unfortunately, aging is our biggest enemy in this. And that is thought to be the largest risk factor for failure of myelin repair. And when we look in the older animals, when we see, I hope you can see this, there is a lot more red cells in the old, normal, unlesioned brain. So, from the beginning. And when we do a lesion, in fact, it doesn't get any worse. It just stays the same. And this is why we don't get that response that is needed in the gray matter. We don't get the inflammatory response needed to kickstart repair, but it just remains unremyelinated in the white matter and therefore fuels further ongoing inflammation. So that the circle of inflammation and repair is broken. Now, how can we overcome this? This is all very gloomy. We want to have some good news, right? So one that everybody's so excited about, not just in the field of aging and in degeneration, generally in aging, is the wonder drug metformin. And PIs of the Cambridge Center for Myelin Repair prior to me took this on gave animals metformin, and they found that it made the old stem cells in our brain young again. And myelin repair was much better. Fantastic. And we looked into this. What does metformin just do for the aging brain? And we find that this is quite preliminary, so what we find that in the aging brain, the inflammation, the number of red cells goes down. So we're getting almost a young brain. And what the other good news is that when you give metformin, it pumps up the stem cells to make more myelinating oligodendrocytes. So it lowers the inflammation that is in the age and provides kind of oomph for the cells to be generated, for myelin regeneration to be made place. So for combating progression in MS, we had this strategy to understand myelin repair, and that we need to understand myelin repair from in the context of inflammation and neuronal health, and we have to therefore understand it in the context of the stem cells, the immune cells, and the neurons, because they are coordinating the repair process. So on the discovery side, we identified mechanism of repair, and then we take it over to clinical trials, and this is our conveyor belt in Cambridge now. Now we can say that in one of the sites of discovery, we found metformin could be an interesting target to try. And indeed, it's being tested now in octopus by the MS Society, and now by us in Cambridge when we have metformin plus clemastine, which is another, how do you say, potentiator for myelin repair, for making the stem cell a little bit more wanting to do their job. So we will hopefully get those outcomes quite soon. So overall, in the center, what we made is that we made a section that is fundamental or basic science that identified targets, and we have identified 2 targets already, and we have few others up our sleeves. And they will be then taken into some preclinical trials, pre-tested, see how good they are, if they see any benefits, and then they're taken into clinical trials. And that hopefully improves health. They are successful, we all want that. And then we also want to improve health and engaging with the people who have the conditions, and we have a lot of events. So everyone's welcome if you fancy to take the risk of traveling up to Cambridge. So here, what we have now, I can say that what is very good is that the first trial that was entered in 2021, the Karadottir trial, we had, so for me, it's one of the first trials that have been tested in people with MS that shows that myelin regeneration can be promoted. And I think that's very critical. It is a proof of concept. And this is not a pipe dream. It is something that can happen if we find the right targets. Bad news is, of course, Karadottir is not a nice drug. So no one wants to take it because it gives you all lots of other things that you do not want. So therefore, we've now taken metformin and clemastine, and we find out the outcome in 2025, early 2025. And then we've already set up the next trial that starts in the autumn of 2024, which is putting Karadottir again at lower concentration with a new agent that I'm not allowed to tell. And that starts again. So we want to be starting with a conveyor belt every few years, testing new treatments. So even though you find one treatment, it may not fit certain people. So we will have a plethora of choices. So overall, where are we landing? We think that we are in this flag. We are testing new treatments. And I think once we've identified those treatments, the next flag is to try to find and focus on the neuron or the inflammation. And then hopefully we will try to have a very comprehensive treatment strategy for MS where we stop the peripheral immune system to attack the brain. We keep the brain not too inflamed, but a little bit inflamed. It's like a happy Goldilocks zone of inflammation, and promote the stem cells to regenerate and keep the neuron healthy while this whole thing is happening. And then I think if we manage this, we will have a combination that will give us that dream that once you have the first relapses, you go to a doctor, you go the MRI scanners, you do all the treatments, they tell you that you have the condition of MS. It's not such a bad thing. It's not nice, but, you will live more or less a normal, good life. And that is what I am hoping for. And similar to diabetes, it's not nice, but it's not so life impacting, let's say. So I want to thank you all for being with me tonight. And this is a picture of our last CCMR annual symposium. It's every year. So if you want to hear more, know more, think about more science, and you dare to come to Cambridge, then you're welcome.
Thank you so much, Thóra. That was honestly wonderful, so inspiring. And I'm sure that everyone here is delighted that you were stuck at the top floor of a care home with no internet and a neurology textbooks. So thank you for doing that. It's great to have you here. Good evening, everyone. My name is Emma Gray. I'm Assistant Director of Research at the MS Society, which means I have the wonderful job of directing our amazing research programme. So I'm very lucky. I get to work with wonderful people like Thóra, with people affected by MS, our research community, and I'm going to be taking you through the panel session this evening. So without further ado, could I ask our wonderful panel to go up this flight of stairs and come and join Thóra, and then I'll introduce everyone. Thank you. You can sit wherever you like. It doesn't mean you're going to get easier or harder questions. You're in the hot spot.
I didn't think that. I had the choice, so it got far away.
Okay, so we've got on the panel, obviously you've been introduced to Thóra. She needs no further introduction. She's director of our Cambridge Centre for Myelin Repair. Next to her is Professor Jeremy Chataway, consultant neurologist at the National Hospital for Neurology and Neurosurgery at Queen's Square, and is the chief investigator of MS-STAT2 and Octopus. And for all the annual lecture fans, if we were doing top trumps, I think he's had the most appearances in terms of panel and lecture. Yeah, I think so. And then sitting next to Jeremy is Annabelle Stigwood, who lives with MS and has supported the MSIT in various ways. She actually took part in the metformin and clemastine clinical trial that Thóra's mentioned, so we can pick her brains on what that was like this evening. And then, by no means least, is Dr. Michael Perry on the end. He's a junior doctor and currently undertaking a PhD investigating neuroimmune mechanisms of remyelination under Thóra's supervision. So that means that Thóra is Michael's boss. That's how it rolls. Okay, so you've had many questions have been submitted via Slido, and I have a screen here, and the plan is to ask them to the panel. I will say who we're going to first, so you'll have a second to panic before you think about your answer. And they're being moderated, so I think keep sending them through. They should still appear on my screen. Okay, so the first question, Thóra, you have to take the first one. You've given the lecture. It's your duty. Okay. So this is an interesting question, and I'm sure is something that you're going to have a good answer on. Can myelin repair completely reverse impact of MS, or is there some loss that will always be permanent?
Ooh,
it's a good one.
That's a tough one. So it's difficult to answer this. I would say it depends how reverse can we go. It depends on the damage, I think. It's kind of like, I'm trying to think about a metaphor. You can restore things when you have, if your house burns down. When is it that you have to put in walk away, or where can you regenerate your house? And I think there must be some kind of pillars or foundation that is still standing, that is solid, that can be built upon. And I assume something similar would be working for myelin repair, that you need the health, you need a neuron that is responsive, can be repaired, that the signals can be repaired. You need, so I think we need that to start with. But we don't know this is sorry, I'm taking very long.
This is fine, I'll tell you when you have to hurry up.
Oh, okay. So,
You're okay.
So it's an unknown when when and how are we, what is our window of opportunity? That barrier, those constraints is an unknown at the moment. So I'm just guessing, and we just don't know. And this is why we have to do the research. We have to figure out whether there is a window of opportunity or whether it is very extended and it can be for very long or not. And how can we then overcome it? And I think now when we have models that we can mimic failure of repair, we can start to ask questions about windows of opportunities. And I think that maybe give us a few years. I will maybe have a refined answer.
So you need to have no internet, small textbooks, and be left alone for a few years.
Please do not.
Okay, okay, the next question I'm going to ask to Jeremy, if that's okay. How does the science of primary progressive MS differ from secondary progressive MS? And do treatments that work for one, would they work for another? Are they the same? Are they different?
Yeah, that's a very good, it's a hard question, isn't it? I mean, I think going back in time, they were felt to be separated. I mean, classically, relapsing remitting MS might begin in the 20s, secondary progression might begin in the 40s, primary progressive MS might be in the 40s or the 50s, but the kind of gradients are the same, or progression. So the view is now that they're two sides of the same coin in terms of a manifestation of progression. And indeed, treatments are starting to be developed, as you will know, for progression. So we have, in the last few years, siponimod for active secondary progressive MS, ocrelizumab for active primary progressive MS. Ocrelizumab, of course, used for relapsing remitting MS. So there's a lot of overlap between the two. And I think they are the same manifestation. They come at different times. And so I think the underlying biology in that established progressive phase, I think, is the same. And so therefore, you can construct trials, as we do, for example, in Octopus, where we put together primary and secondary progressive multiple sclerosis, and we apply the treatments metformin and lipoic acid to the same, because we believe now that they are the same, and so we can have an impact on both. So I think the world has changed from where it was 20 years ago.
Thanks. I'm ad-libbing here. So Thóra, from a neuroscientist perspective, would you agree with that biologically, that it should be the same?
I think it's very difficult. I think it's probably just the amount of damage that is dividing between the two. That you're having it's a higher lesion load, I would suspect. So biologically, the consequences of the lesion, the consequences of not repair would be the same, and just a cumulative effect. That's how I imagine it, at least.
Okay. Interesting question here. Worried it's going to end up with some questionable advice, but the research leading to metformin was based on calorie restriction in rats. Should metformin be combined with intermittent fasting to I mean, we don't know metformin works in humans yet, we should say that. But I guess the question is, could you add these mechanisms together? Is calorie restriction plus a treatment going to boost remyelination, or is it just a complete unknown?
I'm going to say it's an unknown, and I'm going to be, there's a lot of stuff coming about how calorie restriction is translated from animals to humans, and there's all these things online about how to do calorie restriction, and depending on age or whatever, I haven't fully followed, but there is also clinical studies now coming out that may not be so good, or some may not be good, others might be better, I don't know, but there are some uncertainty, so maybe it's not so good to just go and do calorie restriction uncontrolled, unorganized. So I probably would go with a simple, lazy option. You probably acknowledge now I'm rather lazy.
I don't think that's come across.
I would just go for the pill, and then, and take it from there. At least we know what it's doing. Oh.
No, that's a good answer. Okay, can we ask Annabelle a question now? Of course. So, as Thóra, you talked about how the point of Cambridge Centre is to get basic discoveries into the clinic. So, Annabelle has personally been in clemastine and metformin clinical trial. What was that like? And what would you recommend that experience to a friend?
Well, it was it was absolutely inspirational being part of that trial. I was lucky enough to be the first participant in that. Would I recommend it? Absolutely. Just from my personal experience. What I found was that so often I was going to my regular appointments and being told that the drugs I was taking were working beautifully, but the progression was continuing. And it was a complete mystery to me for a long time. Why was this happening? And then it was Professor Coles. I remember I did an appointment with him in clinic, explained about the demyelination, about what was happening. And at that time, it was absolutely devastating because there wasn't anything that could be done. But in such a short space of time, I was looking at what clinical trials were there, and then I found this one with the clemistine, the metformin, and what it aimed to do. That's amazing. It's absolutely amazing, and it's inspirational. What I loved about the trial was the accessibility to just brilliant, kind, lovely people. I could go and ask all the daft questions that you've never really got time or the confidence sometimes to ask when you're in your appointment, your appointment at clinic. I just found it so hopeful. The way that I approach my MS is to always be as positive as I can, because I don't know why, but if I'm feeling sad or I've got a bit, feeling a bit low, then that affects my symptoms. It does. But when I know that there's these things going on, and to be part of such an amazing trial, it's brilliant. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I learned an awful lot about myself.
Thanks, Annabelle. That was lovely. Thank you. Michael, I'm going to move on to you. So, in Thóra's lecture, she talked about some of the pillars of the Cambridge Centre, and one of them really is about developing kind of the next generation of MS researchers and clinicians. What's it like being part of the centre and kind of... sorry?
Should I disappear now?
Oh, yeah, I mean, don't comment on Thóra's supervision skills, but as a general experience, what's it like to be in a centre like Cambridge, where kind of an aim is to build up the next generation? What are your career aspirations?
Well, it's a wonderful place to study.
There you go, it's fine.
So I think the first thing that I'll say is I'll refer to one of the slides that Thóra had in her lecture, and that was all the different principal investigators, the affiliated principal investigators, the postdoctoral researchers, and the 4 PhD students who didn't make the slide. There's a big community of myelin researchers. And in general, in neuroscience, myelin is a relatively niche field. There's not that many myelin biologists. And so they're scattered about the world at different universities. But I think Cambridge has got the largest cluster of myelin biologists in the world. And we all look at myelin from different perspectives. Some are immunologists, some look at the metabolism, aging, repair, etc. And so we all bring a different perspective. And I think that my message would be that when you get lots of researchers together, all working on the same problem, the sum becomes greater than the parts itself. And collaboration becomes immensely important. And undoubtedly, it's the people that are around that make the creativity and what you've seen possible.
Thank you. How long have I got? I'm just checking my timekeeper here. I've got 5 minutes. Okay, I'm going to go rogue. So apologies to all the questions we haven't covered. There are actually some really fantastic ones. You've been a great audience, my God. I'm going to ask you all a question, if you could answer it, if that's okay. Just 1 minute each. What are your hopes for MS research for the next 10 years? We have to end on a tricky one. So, Thóra, do you want to go first?
In 10 years?
Yeah, in 10 years.
I have to rein in my optimism.
No. We want to hear it.
So, when I started to study myelin and understand myelin repair and how it happens, I never thought that in my lifetime there would be any treatments for using that knowledge. It was an academic exercise, and hopefully it will lead somewhere. But that I would be able to see people get better because of myelin regenerative treatments, for example, I didn't dare to dream it. But somehow now I'm extremely optimistic. Maybe it's aging, but I think it's the evidence that is put in front of us right now that you can actually start to dream that this may be possible. We may actually be able to promote myelin repair, and now the big test, if our hypotheses are right, that could actually do a great good deal for people with the condition. And I think we could be reaching that. In 10 years, we might be scratching that or maybe even earlier. But I think we might be there. It is possible.
Jeremy, 10 years?
I think I'd essentially say the same, that within this 10 years, we'll have the first generation of neuroprotective, neuroregenerative treatments that would add into those large number of disease-modifying treatments. We really would make that step change within this last decade, next decade. You've seen the work which lies behind this, and you can see the success. So that's really what I'm truly believing will happen.
Thanks. Annabelle, your perspective?
I'm gonna go big. I would just love it if MS wasn't such a thing, wasn't such the horrible sentence that it is when it's delivered today. Wouldn't it be amazing if you got that diagnosis, but there was a handful of drugs that you could take that would mean that it wasn't going to impact on your day-to-day life? So that's me.
Thank you. Michael, 10 years, Thora's job? I mean, where are you going to be?
Those are big shoes to fill. I think my answer echoes the first two, which is that I think that the same sort of revolution of sorts that we've seen over the last 15 to 20 years of medicines that can stop the relapsing events will become available for remyelination. And I think that my optimism is based upon, one, that we know that the brain does it on its own. And when it starts to fail, even though bexaritone was not a drug that met the standard to become licensed for side effects and various reasons, if you look at the data just at its ability to promote myelin repair, it did in a very small way, but importantly, it's a proof of principle. So it's about getting better. And so my job in the lab is looking at mechanisms of myelin repair. I try to write a step 1 to 100. How does myelin actually repair in order? And you identify the key steps that fail and try to find targets that either promote or inhibit them. And I think that's in the future.
Lovely. Thank you so much. Thank you. Can we give the panel a round of applause? Fantastic. Thank you. Do you want to take it? Thank you. And then I'm going to hand back to Nick. Thank you. You can leave. You can leave. Harder questions next time. Yeah. But I'll hand back to Nick. Thank you so much. We move this, or we'll leave that there for a minute.
Emma, thank you so much, and a huge thank you to Thóra and the panel for an absolutely fantastic session. So that brings our lecture to an end, and thank you to all of you who've watched the session, whether here in person or online. Really do appreciate you being with us. And I do hope you've all have been really inspired, as I've been, by what we've heard this evening. Recent successes mean that now is a really extremely exciting time for the treatment and management of MS, and it really does feel like future breakthroughs are on the horizon. Feels like now more than ever we are within touching distance of stopping MS, and that's a fantastic place to be, obviously. Now, as I mentioned at the beginning, we would be hugely grateful if you would consider, if you're able, to give towards the Stop MS appeal, which is helping to make some of this great work happen. And as I mentioned at the beginning, you'll find QR codes at the back of the bios and on the screen for those watching online. So with that, I'd just like to say for guests in person, you're very welcome to stay for a drink and an opportunity to speak to our wonderful researchers and staff. So if at the end of the lecture, you could just please exit at the back, and our team will direct you back to the City of London rooms where there will be drinks available. So thank you all so much for being with us, and I'll close at that point. Lovely to see you all.